My grandparents saved $50,000 for my college. My parents secretly spent it on my sister. Until Grandpa found out and everything changed. Kitchen table conversation that changed everything happened on a warm evening in late July, just weeks before I was supposed to start community college. I was 21 now, looking back on that pivotal moment when I was 18, fresh out of high school and brimming with excitement about my future. Back then, I thought my parents calling me downstairs meant they wanted to celebrate my acceptance or maybe discuss dorm decorations. I couldn't have been more wrong. "Ellie, sit down," my mother said, her accountant's demeanor already signaling this wasn't going to be the supportive chat I'd imagined. My father, usually content to let Mom handle the serious conversations, sat stiffly beside her. Never a good sign from a man who typically buried himself in project management spreadsheets and left family discussions to his wife. "We need to talk about your college plans," Mom began, and my stomach immediately knotted. Something in her tone screamed trouble. I'd chosen the local community college specifically to be practical. College costs were astronomical, and commuting from home seemed like the smart financial choice. I'd been working part-time at a local cafe, slowly building up my savings, and I assumed my parents would help bridge the gap like most parents do. The assumption, as it turned out, was my first mistake. "Your father and I have been discussing this, and we've decided it's time for you to learn independence," she continued, her words measured and rehearsed. "We won't be contributing to your college expenses. You'll need to figure it out on your own." The words hit me like ice water. Not a partial contribution, nothing. No help with tuition, textbooks, gas money, or even the basic supplies I'd need. I sat there, stunned, trying to process how my childhood bedroom was about to become a rental property. Dad finally spoke up, his voice carrying that forced authority he used when he felt uncomfortable. "If you want to continue living here, you'll need to start paying rent and covering your own groceries. It's only fair that you contribute to the household." Fair. The word echoed in my head as I stared at the two people who were supposed to be my safety net, now itemizing the ways I'd need to pay for the privilege of existing in the house where I'd grown up. My childhood posters still decorated the walls of my room, but apparently nostalgia didn't come with a rent discount. Here's the thing about my parents, they weren't struggling financially. Mom's accounting practice was thriving, and Dad's project management salary was more than comfortable. They owned their house outright, took annual vacations, and never seemed to worry about money. This wasn't about necessity, it was about their version of character building. Meanwhile, my 16-year-old sister Kylie continued floating through life like a princess in a fairy tale. Straight A student, cheer captain, social butterfly. She was everything my parents wanted in a daughter, and they made sure she knew it. While I was getting the tough love treatment, Kylie was getting actual love, the kind that came with shopping trips, allowances, and zero expectations of financial contribution. I wish I could say I stood up for myself in that moment, that I challenged their double standard or demanded an explanation for why Kylie got a free ride while I got eviction threats. But I didn't. I was 18, overwhelmed, and desperately afraid of making things worse. So I swallowed my anger, nodded, and started calculating how many cafe shifts it would take to survive. The math was brutal. Rent, tuition, books, gas, groceries, every expense felt like another weight added to an already crushing load. I picked up every available shift at the cafe, often working until closing and then coming home to textbooks and assignments that demanded attention I could barely give. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. To supplement my cafe income, I started taking baking orders, birthday cakes, cupcakes for office parties, cookies for school events. It was exhausting work that kept me up past midnight most weekends, but every dollar counted when you're trying to fund your own education while your parents treat you like a tenant. Contrast with Kylie's lifestyle was staggering. While I was calculating whether I could afford both lunch and gas in the same day, she was getting weekly shopping trips that resulted in bags of new clothes, shoes, and accessories. Her biggest worry was whether her cheer uniform matched her new backpack. I remember one particularly defeating moment when I asked Mom if she could help with textbook costs for the upcoming semester. The request was met with a lecture about budgeting and the dismissive comment that Kylie doesn't have these kinds of expenses. The implication was clear. Kylie was still their child. I was a financial burden they'd rather not deal with. Moving out crossed my mind constantly, but apartment hunting in our area quickly revealed the harsh reality of rental costs. Even with roommates, most places were beyond my budget, and the few I could theoretically afford required deposits and credit histories I didn't have. I was trapped in a system where I couldn't afford to leave but could barely afford to stay. So I made a deal with myself: survive until graduation, save every possible penny, and then cut ties completely. That goal became my motivation through every double shift, every skipped social event, every night when I fell asleep over my textbooks at 2 a.m. My daily routine became a carefully choreographed dance of exhaustion. At 6 a.m., out the door by 7 for morning classes, then rushing to work for afternoon and evening shifts that often ran until 10 p.m. Weekends meant baking orders and catching up on assignments I was too tired to complete during the week. Cafe was perpetually understaffed, and post-pandemic customers seemed to take their frustrations out on whoever was behind the counter, usually me. The worst part wasn't even the physical exhaustion, it was the complete lack of acknowledgement from my parents. They'd watch me drag myself home after 16-hour days and remind me about upcoming rent due dates instead of asking if I was okay. They noticed when the electricity bill increased and questioned whether I was leaving my bedroom light on too long, but they never noticed the dark circles under my eyes or the way I'd started falling asleep over my dinner. Kylie, meanwhile, had perfected the art of oblivious privilege. She'd sprawl across the couch with snacks Mom had bought her, watching Netflix while I stumbled in from work. "You look tired," she'd observe, as if my exhaustion was a mildly interesting phenomenon rather than the direct result of carrying financial responsibilities she'd never imagined. The breaking point came during midterms of my first semester. I was drowning in assignments, my cafe hours had been cut due to slow business, and I'd taken on a massive baking order, 100 cupcakes and a custom cake for a birthday party, to make up the lost income. I spent an entire night baking, decorating, and perfecting every detail, delivered the order, and went straight to class without sleep. When I finally made it home that afternoon, I found Mom and Kylie in the kitchen, leisurely baking cookies together for fun. Kylie looked up with a bright smile and suggested I join them because baking was so relaxing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I mumbled something about being tired and locked myself in my room. By the end of that first year, I was barely holding it together. My grades were passable but not impressive, hard to excel when you're operating on 3 hours of sleep and constant stress. Every assignment felt like a mountain to climb, and every bill felt like a personal attack on my sanity. What kept me going was the belief that this was temporary, that if I could just push through, I'd eventually be free. I had no idea that my parents' treatment of me wasn't just unfair, it was part of a larger pattern that I was about to discover in the most painful way possible. As Kylie approached her senior year of high school, my parents transformed into what I can only describe as college admissions consultants on steroids. Every conversation revolved around campus visits, application deadlines, and scholarship opportunities. They turned college tours into family mini-vacations, returning home with bags full of university merchandise and detailed plans for Kylie's future. Contrast was impossible to ignore. When I'd started college, my parents had acted like I was imposing on their lives by existing. When Kylie started planning for college, they treated it like a military operation that required all hands on deck. "We're thinking of getting Kylie a car for college," Mom announced one evening, dropping this bombshell while I was trying to study at the kitchen table. Casual way she said it made my blood boil. A car. The same parents who wouldn't help me with bus fare were planning to buy my sister a car. "She'll need reliable transportation," Mom continued, as if explaining the obvious to someone particularly slow. "You know how hard it is to get around without a car." I did know. I'd been taking public transportation and bumming rides for 3 years while watching my bank account drain from gas money when I occasionally borrowed someone else's car. But apparently, transportation challenges were only valid when they affected the golden child. "Ellie, you've always been more independent," Mom added, delivering the line that had become her standard excuse for treating us differently. "Kylie needs more support to succeed." Support. That was their word for what Kylie received, support. What I received was character building and learning responsibility. The semantic gymnastics would have been impressive if they weren't so insulting. The favoritism reached absurd levels as Kylie's college plans solidified. While I was eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches because I couldn't afford groceries, my parents were researching the perfect dorm bedding sets for Kylie. Dad, who had never shown interest in technology beyond his work laptop, suddenly became an expert in college-appropriate computers and tablet specifications. They held family meetings about Kylie's future, actual meetings with agendas and note-taking. I'd walk into the living room to find them huddled around coffee tables covered with campus brochures, Pinterest boards of dorm decoration ideas, and detailed budgets that looked more like shopping lists than financial planning. "What's all this?" I asked during one of these sessions, though I already knew the answer would irritate me. "We're helping Kylie decide between schools," Mom replied without looking up. "It's such a big decision. We want to make sure she's prepared." Prepared. When I'd been trying to prepare for college, I'd been told to figure it out on my own. When Kylie needed to prepare, it became a family project requiring extensive research, financial planning, and emotional support. The celebration dinner when Kylie got accepted to her top choice school felt like a funeral for my faith in family fairness. They ordered her favorite meal, bought a congratulatory cake, and spent the entire evening praising her hard work and bright future. I hadn't even gotten a good job when I'd been accepted to community college. "Ellie, you must be so proud of your sister," Mom said during dessert, turning the spotlight on me as if I were a supporting character in Kylie's success story. "She's really going places." Going places. with a full ride courtesy of the bank of mom and dad, while I was barely scraping together enough money to stay in the same place. The final insult came a few weeks before Kylie's move-in day. I arrived home from a particularly brutal shift at the cafe to find a shiny used SUV parked in our driveway. For a moment, I thought maybe my parents had finally bought a new car and were planning to give me their old one. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've been disappointed repeatedly. Kylie came running outside, practically bouncing with excitement. "They got me a car," she squealed, as if announcing she'd won the lottery. I stood there staring at this vehicle that probably cost more than I'd made in 6 months of cafe shifts and baking orders. Later that night, I overheard my parents discussing Kylie's monthly allowance. They were planning to give her enough money to cover groceries, gas, and entertainment. The same parents who reminded me daily about rent and questioned every dollar I spent were about to hand their other daughter a monthly allowance that exceeded my entire income. Kylie, in her characteristic obliviousness, actually had the audacity to tell me I was lucky to have learned independence so early. "I don't know if I could handle everything you do," she said, as if my situation was a choice rather than a circumstance forced upon me by our parents' selective generosity. Lucky. She thought I was lucky to work myself into exhaustion while she got a free ride to her dream college. The irony was so thick I could have served it at the cafe. By this point, I'd stopped expecting fairness from my parents. The favoritism was so blatant, so unapologetic, that I began to wonder if they even saw me as their daughter or just as an inconvenient reminder of their parenting inconsistencies. Every conversation felt like a business transaction, every interaction filtered through their arbitrary rules about what I deserved versus what Kylie deserved. I started avoiding family dinners, making excuses about work schedules or study sessions. It was easier than sitting at a table where every conversation revolved around Kylie's bright future while my struggles were dismissed as character-building exercises. I felt like a ghost in my own house, present but invisible, contributing financially but emotionally dismissed. The isolation was crushing, but I couldn't find the words to explain the situation to friends who had normal, supportive families. How do you describe the experience of paying rent to sleep in your childhood bedroom while your sister gets a car and an allowance? How do you articulate the feeling of being treated like a burden by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally? One night, when the weight of everything felt unbearable, I found myself reaching for my phone to call the one person I knew would listen without judgment, Grandpa Hank. Growing up, Grandpa's bakery had been my sanctuary. He taught me to measure flour with precision, crack eggs without leaving shells, and create frosting swirls that looked like art. More importantly, he taught me that hard work could be something you love rather than something that slowly kills your spirit. His bakery wasn't just a business. It was a place where patience, skill, and dedication produced something beautiful and nourishing. Grandpa had retired a few years earlier, finally fulfilling his and Grandma's dream of traveling the world together. They'd spent decades building their business from nothing, and when he'd finally hung up his apron, they'd embarked on adventures that had taken them to every continent. The downside of their wanderlust was that staying in touch became sporadic. Occasional postcards, rare phone calls, and updates filtered through my parents' casual mentions of their travels. They'd recently returned home, ready to slow down and enjoy a more settled retirement. I hadn't called earlier because I didn't want to burden them with my problems. They'd worked their entire lives and deserved to enjoy their golden years without listening to their granddaughter's financial and family drama. But that night, sitting in my room after another day of watching my parents lavish attention on Kylie while treating me like a tenant, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Hey, kiddo," Grandpa's familiar voice came through the phone, immediately making me feel less alone. I didn't hold back. The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam, every detail about the rent, the favoritism, the car, the allowance, the complete lack of support or acknowledgement. I told him about working multiple jobs while Kylie got shopping trips, about eating ramen while she got restaurant meals, about struggling to pay for textbooks while she got a monthly allowance. Grandpa listened quietly, making small sounds of acknowledgement that let me know he was processing every word. I could almost picture him in his favorite armchair, his weathered hands folded, his mind working through the implications of everything I was telling him. When I finally finished my emotional download, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Grandpa's voice, quieter than usual but carrying an edge I rarely heard from him. "Kiddo," he said slowly, "I think it's time you knew the whole truth about what's been going on in your family." Then, out of nowhere, he interrupted my mental processing with a question that stopped my world cold. "Ellie," he said slowly, "didn't your parents use the money I gave them for your education?" I blinked, staring at my phone as if it had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What money?" There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. It wasn't angry, not yet, but there was something sharp about it, like he was trying very hard to stay calm. "When you were 16, your grandmother and I put aside $50,000 for your college fund. We gave it to your parents because they said they'd use it to pay for your tuition and expenses. Are you telling me they never mentioned it to you?" I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach by a professional boxer. The air left my lungs in a rush, and for a moment I couldn't form words. $50,000. $50,000. They never said anything, I managed, my voice shaky and small. I've been paying for everything myself. All of it. Grandpa let out a heavy sigh, the kind that felt like it carried years of disappointment and the weight of terrible realizations. Ellie, that money was for you. We gave it to them because we wanted to make sure you had a solid start so you wouldn't have to struggle. If I'd known this is what they were doing... He trailed off, but I could hear the anger creeping into his tone like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. It took me several minutes to process what he was saying. All this time, while I'd been told that my parents couldn't afford to help me and wanted me to learn independence the hard way, they'd had $50,000, specifically meant for me, and hadn't even bothered to tell me it existed. Every ramen noodle dinner, every double shift at the cafe, every night I'd fallen asleep over textbooks because I was too exhausted to think straight, all of it unnecessary. They lied to me, I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Ellie, Grandpa said, and his voice was steel now, they lied to you. That money was yours. Not theirs, not Kylie's. Yours. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to cry, but mostly I just felt numb, like my emotions had short-circuited under the weight of this revelation. Past few years of scraping by, working myself to the bone, and falling behind in school suddenly felt so much heavier, so much more senseless. What do you think they did with it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Grandpa said, and for the first time I could hear real anger threading through his words. But I'm going to find out. There was a long pause, and then he added, Ellie, you're not alone in this. I'll handle it. You just focus on school, okay? Hearing him say that made me feel something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. For so long I'd been carrying everything on my own, thinking no one cared or even noticed my struggles. But now, for the first time, I felt like someone was genuinely in my corner. Thanks, Grandpa, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Anytime, kiddo, he replied. And Ellie? Don't let this crush you. You're stronger than they give you credit for. After we hung up, the anger started to creep in, replacing the numbness like lava flowing through my veins. How could my parents do this to me? How could they take something that was meant to make my life easier and keep it from me, knowing full well how much I was struggling? It wasn't just about the money, though $50,000 would have changed everything. It was the fact that they'd chosen to let me suffer while putting Kylie on a pedestal. They'd lied to Grandpa, stolen from me, and then had the audacity to act like I should be grateful for the scraps they threw my way. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind kept cycling back to all the times I'd asked for help, just a little, just enough to get by, and they'd brushed me off. Times Mom had told me I needed to budget better while they were out buying Kylie a new phone or booking her another campus visit. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, working late nights, skipping meals, delaying graduation because I couldn't afford to take a full course load. And the whole time they'd had $50,000 that could have changed everything. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But there was also something else growing alongside the rage: hope. Grandpa wasn't the kind of person to make empty promises. If he said he was going to handle it, I believed him. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this mess. A few days after that life-changing conversation, my phone lit up with Grandpa's name again. I talked to your parents, he said, not even bothering with the hello. Ellie, you're not going to believe the excuses they gave me. I braced myself. What did they say? They told me they used the $50,000 your grandmother and I gave them for family expenses, he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. When I pressed them on what exactly that meant, your mother admitted they'd been saving it for Kylie's college instead. My stomach dropped through the floor. $50,000, more than enough to cover my tuition, rent, and every expense I'd been killing myself to pay for years, and they'd taken all of it to make sure Kylie had a perfect, stress-free college experience. They had no right, Grandpa continued, practically seething. That money was for you. I made it clear that they need to repay it, every last cent, and if they don't, they're out of the will. I can't stay here anymore, Grandpa, I said suddenly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I can't look at them knowing what they did. Then don't, he said immediately. There's a guest room here with your name on it. Pack your things and come over tonight. Moving out of my parents' house was the easiest decision I'd ever made. I didn't even bother telling them I was leaving. I just started packing my bags as soon as I hung up with Grandpa. Kylie walked past my room at one point, raising an eyebrow when she saw the chaos. What's going on? She asked, completely oblivious to everything that had been happening. I'm moving out, I said curtly, throwing another pile of clothes into a suitcase. She blinked. Wait, what? Why? Ask Mom and Dad, I said, zipping up the suitcase. I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't see my parents that night, they were both out. I left a short note on the kitchen counter that simply said, I'm moving in with Grandpa. Don't call me. And then I was gone. When I got to Grandpa's house, he was waiting for me at the door. Come on in, kiddo, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. This is where you belong. The guest room was cozy, with a big bed and a window that overlooked Grandpa's garden. It already felt more like home than my parents' house ever had. That night, for the first time in years, I went to bed without feeling like the weight of the world was crushing my chest. But of course, the peace didn't last long. The next morning, the calls started. Mom was first. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail that was so dramatic it almost made me laugh. Ellie, how could you just leave like this? Do you have any idea how this makes us look? You're overreacting. Come home so we can talk this out. Yeah, no thanks. Then Dad called. He was less theatrical but just as frustrating. Ellie, we know you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle things. We're family. We can work through this together. Sure. Now they wanted to work through things. Where was that energy when I was drowning in bills and begging for help? By the end of the day, I'd ignored a dozen calls and texts from both of them. The messages were a roller coaster of emotions. One minute they were apologizing, the next they were blaming me for turning Grandpa against them. One text from Mom stood out. Ellie, you don't understand how hard this has been for us. We were just trying to do what was best for everyone. Can't you see that? I stared at it for a long time before finally replying, No, Mom. You weren't trying to do what was best for everyone. You were doing what was best for Kylie, and you didn't care who you hurt in the process. Her response came almost immediately. That's not fair. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you could handle it because you've always been so strong. There it was again, that same tired excuse. I didn't even bother replying. The next day, they started showing up at Grandpa's house. I was sitting at the kitchen table, helping him sort through some bakery paperwork, when I saw Mom's car pull into the driveway. I groaned. They're here. Grandpa didn't look surprised. Let me handle this, he said, standing up and heading to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear everything. Mom was already in full meltdown mode when Grandpa opened the door. Hank, we need to talk to Ellie, she said. She's being completely unreasonable about this whole situation. Grandpa didn't let her in. You mean the situation where you stole $50,000 from her? I think she's being perfectly reasonable. Mom sputtered, trying to defend herself. We didn't steal it. It was for the family. You thought wrong, Grandpa interrupted. That money was for Ellie, and you knew it. You made her struggle while you pampered Kylie. You don't get to waltz in here and act like the victim. I wanted to cheer. Mom tried again. But, Hank, we were just trying to... Grandpa cut her off. If you're not here to apologize, you can leave. Ellie deserves better than this, and I'm not going to stand by while you try to guilt her into forgiving you. There was a long silence, and then I heard the sound of Mom's car door slamming. She didn't even make it into the house. Once Grandpa demanded they repay the $50,000 they'd stolen from me, Mom and Dad's entire operation fell apart. They'd been coasting along like nothing was wrong, but Grandpa wasn't playing games. He gave them a deadline, and when they realized he wasn't bluffing, the panic must have set in. He made it crystal clear. They needed to pay back every single cent or they'd lose their place in the will. The fallout hit Kylie almost immediately. Mom and Dad had been cushioning Kylie's transition to college as much as humanly possible. She was living in a dorm like every other freshman, but they'd gone above and beyond to make it feel like a luxury hotel. Kylie had everything. A mini fridge, a high-end coffee maker, matching decor, and even some pricey electronics to help her focus. She never had to think about budgeting or working. Her only responsibility was to enjoy the college experience. Well, not anymore. With $50,000 to repay, Mom and Dad had to tighten the purse strings dramatically. Kylie's weekly care packages? Gone. The spending money they were planning to send her? Cancelled. Even some of the fancy extras in her dorm had to be returned. Suddenly, Kylie wasn't just another spoiled golden child. She was a college student like the rest of us. The best part? She had to get a part-time job. I found out through Instagram, of course. Kylie posted a selfie in the mirror of some boutique with a caption that read, "First day working. Girl, new adventures." 2 hearts. I couldn't help but laugh. She made it sound like it was some cute little hobby, but I knew her well enough to know she was miserable. Didn't take long for Kylie to crack. One night, she called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Ellie, she wailed, everything's ruined. I took a deep breath. What's ruined, Kylie? My life, she cried. Mom and Dad aren't sending me any more money. They said they can't afford it, and now I have to work and budget, and she broke off into another round of sobbing. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Kylie, welcome to the real world. You're finally experiencing what the rest of us deal with every day. She didn't appreciate that. This is all your fault, she snapped, her voice sharp with anger. If you hadn't told Grandpa, none of this would have happened. That made me laugh out loud. Oh, I'm sorry, did I ruin your little bubble of privilege? Because as far as I'm concerned, you're just catching up to what I've been dealing with for years. Kylie started to say something else, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. Look, I said, cutting her off, if you want someone to blame, talk to Mom and Dad. They're the ones who stole from me to fund your perfect little life. She hung up on me after that, which honestly saved me the trouble. The weeks that followed were almost entertaining. Kylie started posting cryptic updates on social media about how hard life was and how she felt betrayed by the people she trusted most. It was laughable, considering she'd spent her entire life being pampered and shielded from reality. Now that she had to face even a fraction of the challenges I'd been dealing with, she acted like the world was ending. One post stood out to me, a picture of her dorm desk with a cup of instant noodles and a caption that read, "College life, it's not as glamorous as it seems." I stared at it for a while, debating whether to comment. I wanted to say something like, "You've been living this way for 2 weeks. Try doing it for years." But I stopped myself. What was the point? Kylie would never understand. Still, her pity party didn't go unnoticed. Her friends and followers flooded her comments with messages of support, saying things like, "Stay strong, Kylie, and you've got this." As if getting a part-time job and budgeting was some insurmountable challenge. From what I heard through the family grapevine, Kylie wasn't adjusting well to her new reality. She complained to anyone who would listen about how unfair it all was, but the sympathy wasn't as strong as she probably hoped. Most people were too busy with their own problems to care about hers. Mom and Dad tried to soften the blow, of course. They sent her a couple of care packages, nowhere near as extravagant as before, but still enough to remind Kylie that she was the favorite. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they told me that struggling was good for me, that it would make me stronger. Now that Kylie was struggling, they were bending over backward to make sure she didn't fall apart completely. But even with their help, Kylie wasn't thriving, she was surviving. Sure, but that was it. Her grades started slipping, she had trouble keeping up with her job, and the cracks in her perfect facade were starting to show. And honestly, I didn't feel bad for her. Meanwhile, Grandpa didn't just give me a place to stay. He made sure I had everything I needed to get back on track. He helped me organize my finances, encouraged me to take on a full course load to finish college sooner, and even got me involved in his bakery's operations. Felt incredible to be around someone who actually cared about my future. As for my parents, they kept trying to reach out. First, it was constant. Mom left voicemail after voicemail, her tone switching between guilt trips and apologies. "Ellie, we're sorry, okay? We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. We love you." Sure, they loved me, just not enough to treat me fairly when it mattered. Dad's messages were more subdued but just as frustrating. "Ellie, we know you're upset, but you've got to see it from our side. We were trying to do what was best for the family, and now this family needs you. Please come home." I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? They weren't sorry for what they'd done, they were sorry they'd been caught. And they only wanted me back to exploit me one more time. Eventually, the calls slowed down. I think they realized I wasn't going to forgive them just because they wanted me to. Shortly before I officially graduated, Grandpa sat me down in the kitchen. "Ellie," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "I've been thinking about the future of the bakery." I opened the folder and found a stack of papers detailing the business's operations, financial projections, and expansion plans. Grandpa smiled at me, his eyes crinkling the way they always did when he was proud. "You've been helping out a lot, and I can see how much you care about this place. I want you to take over when you're ready." I stared at him, completely stunned. "Grandpa, are you serious?" "Of course I'm serious," he said. "You've earned this, Ellie. And I know you'll make it even better." Hearing that from him meant everything. For so long, I'd felt like my hard work didn't matter, like no one saw how much I was struggling. But Grandpa did. He always had. Taking over the bakery became my focus after that. I threw myself into learning everything I could about the business, from managing staff to balancing budgets to developing new recipes. Grandpa was right there with me, guiding me through every step, sharing decades of wisdom and experience. By the time I graduated, I was ready to take the reins. Grandpa officially handed over the business, and we celebrated with a big party at the bakery. Friends, staff, and even some of my professors showed up to congratulate me. It was the kind of celebration I'd always dreamed of but never thought I'd get. These days, I don't talk to my parents much. They're still trying to patch things up, acting like a few apologies will magically fix everything. What they don't realize is that Grandpa already removed them from the will months ago. They're probably still clinging to the hope that they can weasel their way back in, but honestly, it's not my problem anymore. I'm too busy running the bakery and building something real for myself. The business is thriving. We've expanded our catering services, added new product lines, and even started offering baking classes. Every day, I get to do work that I love, surrounded by people who respect and value me. If my parents want to waste their time trying to undo the consequences of their choices, that's on them. Let them watch from the sidelines while I succeed. I'm moving forward and I'm not looking back.